Call it a midlife crisis or a reawakening, but there's something going on over at Atari. Between the Recharged franchise and the upcoming anniversary compilation, it's obvious that Atari is not going to let their 50th anniversary go to waste. Atari Mania is the company's newest and weirdest form of celebration yet, mashing up some of the most iconic Atari 2600 games and filtering them through a minigame compilation that resembles Nintendo's popular WarioWare franchise. It's a game that finally answers the age-old question, what if Atari combined Missile Command and Pong into a single game? The result is a fun, weird, and surprisingly challenging nostalgia trip that sends us through the early years of this iconic company. This is my review of Atari Mania. As the caretaker to the Atari Vault, it's your job to keep things running smoothly. This is, after all, where Atari keeps all of their most valuable games, systems, accessories, collectibles, and, as it turns out, even the characters. On most nights, your job would be limited to sweeping up trash and making sure that nobody breaks in. But when a bunch of dead pixels show up, it's the caretaker's job to solve a bunch of simple puzzles and compete in a tournament full of weird minigame mashups. If he fails, all of Atari's characters could be sucked into the dead pixels void and be erased from the world for good. Oh, the horror. As it turns out, these dead pixel monsters are hungry and they're starving for games. You'll throw a few classic Atari titles into the void, and then you'll play a series of short and simple minigames based on those titles. For example, you'll need to play a round of Pong, Yar's Revenge, Adventure, Haunted House, Millipede, and many more classic Atari 2600 titles. However, once they've eased you into the game with some simple tasks based on those recognizable games, that's when Atari Mania bumps it up a level and starts getting weird with the concept. You see, this is when the different games start to blend together. For example, one stage will blend Pong with Yar's Revenge, while another will be Millipede mixed with the racing game Dodge 'em. You also see stages that mash up Crystal Castles and Dark Chambers, Circus and Breakout, and Demons to Diamonds and Gunslinger. And even when the minigame isn't some wacky mashup, it tends to have you doing a relatively simple task that makes you interact with the game in a slightly different way. Now, once you've made your way through a dozen or more of these bite-sized minigames, you'll end up finding one of the bosses, which takes elements from many of Atari's most popular games and ties them into a traditional boss fight. For example, one of the harder levels will have you controlling a breakout paddle and trying to hit these red balloons, which in turn will drop bombs on the dead pixel monster below. There's also a cool boss that mixes a bit of asteroids with Gravatar. It's tricky and challenging in all the right ways. Once we beat the boss, we'll end up earning a new tool that'll make the caretaker's life a lot easier. I'm talking about a magnet, a hammer, bug spray, a candle, and a whole lot more. You'll use these to open up new parts of the vault, where you'll solve puzzles and pick up high-res box art for all of the games found in Atari Mania. There are also a bunch of bonus games you can play that are scattered around the vault, such as challenging the mice for instruction manuals, and taking on the arcade cabinets to relive each stage's crazy minigames. All said, there are more than 150 of these minigames, so it's gonna take you a while to see and beat them all. What I like about these recreations is how they've been visually enhanced, but still look old and retro. Instead of going with a more modern polygonal design, they kept it classic with pixel characters. They also chose to ignore the divisive style found in the Recharged franchise. While I don't love all of the design choices, I think they made the right decision by going with an art style that is more traditional. One thing that really surprised me about the game is how difficult it can be. Even the first few dead pixel monsters will take a few tries to take down. A lot of the challenge comes from simply trying to figure out what you're supposed to do from one stage to the next, and then memorize the solution. For what it's worth, each minigame comes with a brief description of what you're supposed to do and then a button guide. That's helpful, but you're definitely going to need to replay some of these stages to figure out how to beat them. And as the game gets tougher and the stages grow longer, you'll also run into the problem where you just have fewer lives to spare. Couple this with some frustrating cheap death in some of the mini games, and you have a game that looks easy, but will occasionally kick your ass. Look, I'm fine with the challenge, but I wish that there was a little bit more attention spent to the Atari Vault. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to be able to see the high-res cover and read through the instruction manual. But where's the write-up putting all these games into context? Why are they important? What games do they go on to inspire? You gotta give us something more than just the cover art. In fact, I'll go one step further and say that it's disappointing that you can't play the original versions of any of these games. Even if it's an emulation of the Atari 2600 original, I feel like it's a missed opportunity letting us play snippets of the original game, but not the real deal. And then, there are the technical problems. It's barely worth mentioning the inconsistent frame rate, because the real problem with Atari Mania is that it occasionally gets stuck on this load screen. You'll just sit there waiting for something to happen, but there's nothing on the other side. It's a loading screen to nothing. I had to exit out of the game and restart at least 36 times, which was really annoying. I don't care if the game's good about auto-saving, this loading screen problem needs to be fixed. When it's working properly, Atari Mania is a wild and crazy mashup of some of the company's earliest console games. By mixing games as disparate as Pong, Asteroids, Yar's Revenge, Carnival, Crystal Castle, Gravatar, Haunted House, and Solaris, you get a bunch of inventive levels that will delight and entertain. Toss in a funny story and a couple of genuine twists, and you have a pretty cool nostalgia trip that does a great job of honoring Atari's history. I want to see more games like Atari Mania. Where has this Atari been all these years? Renewed by their 50th anniversary, Atari is back with a crazy minigame compilation that has to be seen to be believed. Atari Mania mashes up some of the company's greatest hits, creating a fun and funny adventure that'll remind gamers of Nintendo's popular WarioWare franchise. Unfortunately, for a game that is steeped in this much nostalgia, Atari Mania is surprisingly bad at putting the games into context. And also, doesn't come with any of the Atari 2600 games that it's honoring, which is disappointing. And while it has a few technical problems that'll have you restarting the game dozens of times, that's not gonna stop me from recommending this weird yet always entertaining mashup. I like the middle-aged Atari. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite Atari game? It of course doesn't have to be from the early days because they have a large catalog that spans multiple decades. 5 to be exact. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back shortly with Die Hard game fans' first annual Golden Meg Awards, as well as a Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew episode covering Pilot Wing 64. We have a huge week in store for you, so do me a favor and click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.